All right, team, I think we are ready to get started here. Welcome in, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Get comfortable, get ready to engage in today's webinar, The Business Guide to Contrast Today's S&OE Environment with Tomorrow's IBP. You can go ahead and go to the next slide. Thank you. And this webinar is going to provide insightful information into the IBP world, all while utilizing your existing SAP system to its full potential. Today, while Christy and Sean will take about 30 minutes to guide you through this webinar, we encourage you to send any questions that you may have in the Q&A section at the end of the webinar. We'll have time to answer any questions or discussions that you may have. Now I'd like to introduce you to today's speakers. Christy is a thought leader with Reveal with expertise in IBP, organizational change management, and decision support solutions for supply chains of all shapes and sizes. Sean is a senior partner at Reveal and has more than 20 years of strategic business experience that have achieved effective delivery, enhanced competitiveness, and much more business transformation. Please join me in welcoming our speakers, Christy and Sean.
Thank you. All righty. Well, guys, this is the agenda that we have out here for you today. So welcome. It's really good to find an opportunity to meet with you, to spend some time. Christy and I will try and keep this very conversational as we go. We don't want it to sound like this is a lecture. We have a bit of fun if we can, and let's look at it that way. And we've got 4 topics that we're going to work through. The first is really, it talks about the journey towards effective S&OP. We'll then talk about these 2 worlds of S&OP and S&OE and how they come together and or collide or don't meet, whatever the situation might be. We'll touch on some capabilities in and around IBP, and then some key considerations to drive value before we get to the wrap up and questions. And I'm sure there'll be a lot of that that's out there for us. So why don't we just kick straight on in there in terms of looking at this journey. And I want to, off the bat there, Christy, just think about this, is that we hear so much about the value that S&OP brings, IBP as the future space for that, and it brings all this value to the business. If we look at some of the work that was done by the Aberdeen Group, for instance, and we look at what's out there, you start to see, in dollars and cents, how this impacts the business. Makes such a significant difference. Assists us from a working capital point of view, from reducing write-offs and so on. And there's many other areas like the Ollie White Group themselves that give us all of this really sound, solid information, which we ourselves have seen in the clients that we've been, the value that it brings to the table. And yet we have this challenge. And I don't know, would you mind sharing some ideas and some issues around those challenges that we have, and how we make the bridge between the two, maybe?
Yeah, Sean, I think this is perfect in terms of the value proposition. What we find is that sales and operations planning tends to fall to a small group of folks. They're trying to get it rolled out to serve the larger needs of the business. And like all good change programs, if you don't have a good line of sight on what it is that really motivates each of your key stakeholders to participate in the process, it can become super passive. And if you look at this study, I really like this study a lot because it really paints a clear picture of what happens. So we recognize that it's important. Important to agility, 86% of respondents. And these are companies that have sales and operations planning up and running, usually at more than one location or business unit, and have had some time to gain some experience. And, we know that it's important. It's something that we should do in order to be competitive. But yet, if you look at some of these other stats, do we really feel like it's balanced? No, not really. It tends to be more focused on, reactive kind of processes, or focus on fixing the demand and not aligning the supply. And you can see that here, people are investing in software to try to help manage this process. 77% of this particular group of respondents, and they're trying to do the same thing over and over every single month, but they're just not getting the bite out of the process they're looking for. And a lot of that is, I think, what we're going to talk through today is that kind of baton pass. What actually happens with all those great plans that we're building through the sales and operations planning cycle, and then how do they actually materialize in results and actual execution? So hopefully some of what we're going to talk through today might spark some ideas for folks in terms of how to approach this. And I know, you and I have both been through the ringer on this, both, in the world that we live in now, providing some advisory services to organizations, but also just previous life of having, lived and stood up these processes. So the struggle is real. And if people find this difficult, like, you are not alone. I'd be surprised to hear anybody say, oh yeah, no problem. Setting up sales and operations planning within our organization, super easy breezy. 1, 2, 3, no big deal. So let's get into it and talk about some of the things that happen and how we can make it better or easier.
Like that, super easy. Not quite true, but it's a great term to think about. And I mean, if we just go and reflect for a moment around some of the core processes that we're all involved in, we see these things happening, all intended, to give us this integrated capability that we can react as a supply chain to the demand that's coming down the pipe. We can meet it on time, and it's everything from what's going on with the new products and how they're being launched, what's coming on into the pipeline. It's into what does that mean in terms of demand from the marketplace, from our current customer base, from what the marketing team is doing, etc., to get there, and how do we then supply to meet that. So we look to see if we can engage in all these things, and then we put it all together in a nice package, and we go to our sales and operations planning meeting, and we reconcile what's going on. We look at some of the analysis. How have we done last month compared to this month, etc. Now, and that's one piece of the puzzle. As we reflect, for instance, on the IBP piece, there's a whole journey that organizations need to be prepared for and need to be aware of. And I think I think you wanted to do a poll this morning, which I'm excited to see what comes out of that poll when we get there. But it really is around saying, well, what is that journey about, guys? And where are you as an organization? And I think that brings us into this slide. So Christy, maybe you want to introduce the poll and then talk to this, and let's just hear about the fun that comes with the journey that we're going to be going on to.
Yeah, I think Sean, you speak to the fact that this is a deep and wide, it's a widely diverse process that you're trying to put in place to be able to manage. And so, for a lot of organizations, it's like, where do we even start? What's the most pressing need that we're trying to meet, and how much can we take on at a time? And so I would love it, Sam, if you could help us put a poll in the field. I'd love to hear from folks because it'll help shape our conversation today. If you think about your sales and operations planning process, are you at a stage where you're just maybe getting started or thinking about that journey? You're not in a place where you stood up sales and operations planning really at all, or an integrated business planning process. That's the other thing. It can be called so many different names: S&OP, SIOP, sales and operations planning as a long-term integrated business planning. They're all different flavors on the process, depending on kind of where you are and what stage you're at. Option B is you've got an active S&OP, but you are having trouble getting that link from what you're doing in sales and operations planning to what actually is flowing through to execution. So sales and operations execution, actual results out on the manufacturing floor, or what you're bringing in from your suppliers. Option C is, hey, you've got an active process, but it's not really supported by a system. And it's also not fully aligned within your ERP environment. And then D is you're active for sales and operations planning. You may even be using IBP, SAP IBP as your platform for that, or maybe another advanced planning solution, but you're still having trouble with that link back to what's going on in the ERP environment or in actual execution. Or E, you're like slaying it. You've got sales and operations planning up and running. It's an IBP or another equivalent platform, and it is fully aligned, in which case when we get to the questions, you can help us answer them, because that would be fantastic for those of you who have unlocked and achieved that portion of the journey. That is definitely a massive accomplishment. So would love to hear from folks where they think their organizations sit right now, and we'll use that to kind of help shape the conversation as we're going through today. And while maybe people are answering, I'll also make this point, because it's worth mentioning. If we have anyone who's joining us today who is not an SAP ERP customer, meaning you're not running ECC or S4, IBP can also be used as a standalone solution that can be integrated with other ERP solutions, or in fact can be for even smaller organizations, your kind of end-to-end tool. While you cannot actually actively transact in IBP, you can use it for your full cycle of planning. So that's worth mentioning as well.
Okay, so
We
how are we
got some
looking on that?
responses back. We have about 12 responses. For option A is 8%, option B is 50%, C is 25%, D is 17%, and we have no one for E.
Not yet. Not
Not
yet.
Okay.
All right. I think that helps, Sean. That helps a lot with how we might shape the conversation today. So it's good to hear. Thank you very much, guys, for sharing.
Yeah. Thank you for that. So, I mean, we seem to have a propensity around about that middle mark there. You know, there is active S&OP, but there's work to be done clearly in getting to the end stage. And I think what that does is it kind of sets us up to just talk and reflect a little bit about the strategic and the tactical environments, these two different worlds that exist out there. We looked at a moment ago, we looked at the typical 5-step approach of what sales and operations planning is about, how that aligns itself from a strategy point of view, linking back to the business plan of the organization, linking back to whatever the cross-functional plans are for the company in order to achieve the objectives and goals, etc. But that does need an execution layer. And the execution layer is to say, well, here's how we do the business to get to that. And the alignment between the two is really what drives effective outcomes at the end of the day. How is the planning and the execution aligning with one another and getting us to a point where we run a successful business, we meet the requirements of our customers that are out there, and we remain more competitive as a result, because we've aligned those two things so closely. So I think this slide is really just trying to give you a viewpoint of those two worlds, because you need to literally map it against, well, what's happening out there. So in the first world that we've got, and I don't mean to call it first world, third world, but in the first world and the second world, maybe that's where we're going to be today. Here's where the S&OP planning and IBP comes into play. And we've got all of these different factors and this information and this data that's feeding into our sales and operations plan, and hopefully positioning us at a point where we can really be effective in terms of alignment with the market, effective with our customer base, and remaining competitive. And the execution piece is that piece below it, which really says, okay, how are we going to supply to meet all of this demand? And if you look at it, we've got an end-to-end picture here almost that starts right at the top at the business planning, goes all the way through demand management to MRP, what its role may or may not be, how do we buy, how do we produce, what happens on the shop floor, and how at the end of the day is the alignment across the board. So you've got these two different worlds that are out there. And I think the thesis that we're trying to propose today is to say IBP is going to be awesome for you. We want you to get to that stage 5, but you just need to recognize this connection between these two different worlds. Christiana, is anything you want to add to that before we go on to some of the silos that we see and how that ends in breakdown?
I think that, it's important to know. A lot of people will say, okay, is it, am I running MRP? Am I running, IBP, whether that's heuristics or the optimizer? And you have to start with where you're at right now and how you are able to process that information, right? So there's nothing that says that you have to make a total and immediate swap over, to thinking about one of these two systems driving everything, you need to be, as Sean's painted here, just making sure that there's there's a commonality and there's a link, there's a conscious decision with how the two environments are going to interact with one another, so that process and systems are aligned with positioning the right information in the right place at the right time. So, I think that's the key to figuring out how to knit these two worlds together, and also understanding that there's a lot of opportunity to grow and mature, and that's one of the best things, the best news about both the process and the technology going forward, is that there's a lot of opportunities to take steps and continue to layer on as you're able to consume capabilities within your business. So
okay. So Christy, take us into the world of where things break down and where we need to be aligned and passing things on to one another.
Yeah, so this picture of these folks with the baton pass here, what it is really all about is making sure that as you're investing your time and your energy into getting a really good solid plan out there. If you're doing gap analysis and you're reviewing for revenue and profitability, you're doing your demand planning, you're proposing out what you think you're capable of supplying, looking at rough cut capacity planning in the mid to long term horizon, and then thinking about how you pass that through to actually create a reasonable, realistic, and actionable schedule. If that baton pass is not good, it's like you just sat it down on the table and it just sits over there, then it doesn't matter how great the work is at the top. And I can't tell you, Sean, how often we see that there's actually rework that goes on in this particular phase. It's really worth paying attention to, because you'll find that you'll have the team that is putting together the demand and the mid to long term supply plan. And then when it comes to actual execution, whether that is planners or whether that is actually all the way down at the shop floor, they're doing something very, very different from what was proposed. And as soon as that happens, what happens then? You get all of these alerts and exceptions because the plan is not being executed as it should. So that S&OE linkage becomes so vitally important to be able to make value out of that process. And if we think back to the study at the beginning, we know that this is key to to our agility. We know that we're going to plan to a particular capacity to leave room for flexibility and innovation. And if we're not able to do that effectively, then we lose the balance. And what you just brought in here, think about old Apex terminology, the firm, slushy, and free zone, that we all have worked with. It's the same concept here, right? Like firm, trade-off, and planning zones. And there's relevant levels of information and relevant KPIs that are different in judging the quality of the planning, depending on where you are in that process. And so, as you're thinking about how to manage through this process and how to get everybody kind of in harmony and, and working well together, it really is thinking through relevant levels of planning, relevant information to make the right decisions, depending on where you are in that zone. And that's what really enables those baton passes, lets everybody have, their piece of the puzzle in order to be able to move things forward.
And to that point, Kirsty, being clear about those different time zones. We have the short term horizon we're looking at, and then we've got a medium to longer term horizon, which that planning has got to be going and be informed by how successful otherwise you've been along the way. So those two dynamics is what pulls that S&OP and S&OE space towards it. That's cool. That's really good. Thank you. I'm always amazed by this view at the end to end, because it just drives the two best secrets about SAP. One, it's integrated, and the most difficult thing about SAP, it's integrated. So those two things I think are always playing in my mind when I think about this particular one. So thank you for that. I think that positions us well to kind of look at, well, okay, so what are the capabilities that IBP is going to bring, because that's kind of the new order, the new world that we're moving to. And when I look at it, Christy, they just seems to be, we're spoilt for choice almost here.
Yes, we are.
We are spoilt for choice. We've got so much that we can and couldn't be doing. And I think therein even lies a challenge or a danger, that with us spoiled for choice, do we Do we do it big bang all together? Do we chop it up, do it in smaller chunks? I don't know. Are there any pointers that would point to saying, well, this is a mammoth beast, if we want to call it that we have? Do we do it all at the same time, or what would your take be on that?
Sean, it really depends on, if you go back to the poll that we were taking earlier, if you think about the maturity of just the process and how that is working within, the organization, you go to a solution like IBP for one of two reasons. Either, you find that your process is outpacing your ability to keep up with it from, a technology and reporting and analytics standpoint. And then you're entering IBP because you're ready to consume a lot of that functionality. And you're really thinking about a broader landscape. Or you're going, you're kind of struggling with getting this off the ground, or it's a brave new world and we're just exploring this. And then if that's the case, then I think you can be far more discreet. And if you look at all of these options, there really are good, clear pre-qualifiers for whether you're ready to do something like move into inventory optimization, or if you really need, the demand module versus the statistical forecasting that's available in sales and operations planning, or if you need, order-based planning versus time series planning. So there's lots of good ways to go through and kind of evaluate where to start based on where your organization is and really what it is that you're manufacturing, producing, and how you go through the process of doing that. Or if you're a distribution company or you're buy sell, that kind of organization, then that's another thing altogether. But certainly if you wanted just a quick hit on where to get started, that sales and operations planning module really does give you a good first foray into things, and you can build from there. That's supported with supply chain control tower and some of the collaboration tools. Man, you've got a really good, solid place to start. And then you can really start to explore some of the other forms and features that IBP offers.
All the way, looking at that, just continuing to keep that integration piece in the back of your mind between the S&OP world and the S&OE world, just to keep that in our mind around how do we drive execution at the end of the day. So I think you've got an example here that you can share with us just around some of the process framework and some of the examples that are out there. So maybe let's take a look at these. Do you want them all up at the same time, Christy, or?
Yeah, that's fine, Sean. Go ahead and bring them in. And what I wanted to talk about a little bit here is dovetailed into what we were just discussing about where to start. And that's the idea that an entirely different way to look at IBP and its offerings is to rather think about the process. And as you're thinking about the process, and you can think about all of the different tools that are available in IBP, and then you figure out how to dovetail those tools, those capabilities into supporting the process rather than the other way around. So for example, if you were thinking about, if product lifecycle management is a massive issue for you and you need a better way to be able to manage phase in, phase outs, and discontinuation, and that really is a major pain point. You need to be able to go in and do some real tough choices around SKU rationalization, and you're an open to buy environment, then that's going to help you to know what capabilities you want to take advantage of. But if you think about it, and what we've done here is, and these are just a few examples, I just selected a couple to look at today, is we're thinking about the different meetings, the different pieces of the process, and kind of what those different pre-qualifiers are to get there.
Yeah.
Then we can start to map into some of those capabilities and say, okay, so here's how we can use this to our best advantage. And again, continuing to layer on. What is really great about an environment like IBP versus, and I say this with all the love in the world, versus APO, because I was total APO girl. But one of the challenges with APO is that it does have a high bar in terms of being able to get started. And IBP, the user interface on the day-to-day planning side, it is operating within Excel. It's not just an Excel worksheet. It's based. You've got all of the the technical backing to make that a full planning suite, but it presents in that fashion. And so that's familiar for all of us. And, and then you have the web apps, which are usually overlooked, that help you with making sure you don't have to pull data out of IBP, put it in something else, and then produce your PowerPoints to be able to walk through meetings. The whole point and purpose is to be able to do, what if scenarios and simulations, and, and have those conversations in a more real-time environment. Because the biggest complaint about sales and operations planning is that the process lags behind what is actually needed in terms of the day-to-day business needs. So
Right.
lots of good stuff here, and some visuals for y'all to see. It's more than just the Excel-based planning, but you have all of these other capabilities here. And I particularly like things like the waterfall charts that help you to understand the reasons to believe in some of that gap resolution and analysis that will come into play. So
yeah,
lots
I
of good
think
stuff.
that last point that you made there about an Excel-based system and so on is, those who've been on previous Reveal webinars have heard us time and time again talk about being careful about doing the business in spreadsheets. And that's very different. I mean, this is really a built-in system. It's got all the capabilities within it. It's directly aligned to SAP if you need to be, or whatever other data that's coming into it. It's not about taking information outside, doing something with it, and then trying to make decisions and arrive at one place with different source of the truth. Here you still have the ability to have a single source of the truth, which is really, really important. So yeah, so thank you for that. I mean, I think the start in S&OP is some good advice, and then really finding out where you are as an organization in terms of making the decision as to what and which pieces you're going to go with as you go forward. So thank you for that, Christy. Right, I think what that does then is kind of brings us to some key considerations to drive value, and there are a number of success factors, which I think would like to leave you with in terms of getting to that. And I'm just going to start at the top one and just briefly talk about the organizational dynamics that go with the whole process. One needs to have leadership from the top. One needs to have support from the top. And we highlight this because it is such an important foundational block in order to be successful at the end of the day. Have we got the support from where it counts? Are our senior executives bought into it? Are they accepting that this is going to be the tool where we will do our strategic planning process? It's not everyone has their own thing happening out there, but the leadership need to come in and they've got to commit to what's a very new style of running your business. And so this piece at the top, before we even get to the individuals and people who are fundamental to our cross-functional teams, the whole notion of leadership buying in and leadership getting us to a point where they take ownership, they're committed to it, they're bringing the organization along on the journey, because there will be naysayers, no question, along the way, who want to go back to old ways. And so that leadership up front is going to be really, really important as we go. So, Christy, with that said, I mean, I think we're all in agreement there around the leadership perspective, and that we really do need that to support and to help with the building block. What about some of the others, the cross-functional teams, the process steps, which you've already spoken about a bit, and then some of these planning timelines and horizons? Do you want to just share some information there with us?
Sure, I'll share a very quick story, Sean. So I remember my very first day. I was working with a fast fashion company, and they were doing their open to buy meeting. And I remember walking in the door, and they were talking about it. Everybody was cheering because back orders were down and service levels were up. And I asked, and I was excited, and so I asked the question. I said, great, so how are orders doing? How's incoming sales? And it was like I just had said the most horrible. I told them that a horrible thing had happened, because they weren't looking at a balanced scorecard. And what was really happening is, for the last 3 months, sales had been down dramatically, and that allowed those other two metrics to recover. So the diversity of the cross-functional support becomes really, really important. Also, the ability to tell compelling stories that get your folks involved. I mean, that's the tough thing. If you're facilitating this process, right? We're asked to be, great analytical minds. We've got to have our fingers on the pulse of the business. We've got to be tuned in with operations. And then on top of that, we have to be able to tell compelling stories that speak to, you know, a wide variety of folks' needs so that we can get their brains in the process. That critical thinking, cross-functional discipline becomes so important, as does, you know, the process cadence and management and having action and activity around that. The verb for sales and operations planning cannot be attend. You know, we
Yes.
have to get people invested in participating, and it cannot be completely reactionary. If it is, you know, it's really hard that goes to the can't keep pace with the speed of the business, you know, so we've got to be able to get to that place. And so really focusing on that process capability in conjunction with those time horizons, that's the sweet spot of being able to get those things to kind of work together. So
Right. And I think that it begs the question about being ready, correct? I mean, are we actually ready to make this? And you know, we have the what's known as the business maturity continuum. So how does that play for us? And how would we advise some of our folk on this call around whether or not they're ready for the journey?
that's a
What would
great
we think?
question. And if you look at this, like what's cool about this is it gives you a little bit of a checklist that gives you some insight. So if you've ever done some of that internal scorecarding before, this is a really nice way to be able to go through and look at it if you haven't had the chance to do that previously. But really to get value, real compelling value out of an advanced planning solution like IBP, or really to be able to mature your process and be able to take advantage of that and have information that you can rely on. You're really developing a data-driven culture. So you've got to have the data integrity and you've got to have the business rules in place. So you're really talking about being in a stage 4 where really when you look at the information in the system, you can trust and believe it because that's what you're building your plans on. So if you're at a place where you're coming out of, you know, you've got good data integrity, your system is planning and performing the way that you would like it to, you're not having to constantly manually intervene with that process, then now it's time to start thinking about investing in, you know, these more advanced platforms to help support your process. If you're not there yet, that will have to be part of when
Right.
you're actually going there, right? Like, so one way or another, you have to do that pre-work. And, you know, and everyone underestimates, I have underestimated the lift that is making sure that you get that data right. But it's so important because otherwise the plans we're producing are based on false information. And that means that they're not reasonable and realistic and actionable. And when we actually try to make that connection through all those little baton passes that happen, we don't get the results we're looking for. So that
Right.
becomes really important. And Sean, if people aren't sure where they stand on that, could they maybe take like the self-assessment on our website? Would that give them some insight?
I was going to suggest that is, you know, if you go to the Reveal website, we have what's called a self-assessment. And the self-assessment actually is going to take you through a series of questions about your organization and where are you right now. I think Samantha's probably going to put a link into the chat, so you might want to take a look at that link in the chat. And really, what that's going to do is position you as an organization along this continuum, and you'll get immediate feedback with a pretty neat little report out that says, well, based on what you've told us, this is where you are right now. And I think that really helps what Christy was talking about, saying, you know, well, are we there yet? Are we ready? Or is there other work to be done? Because I think let's also just remember, I think our executives, our top executives at least, their mind is already in stage 5. They're at business value. And they believe we've invested, we spent a lot of money on SAP, you have the tools. So as far as they're concerned, that's where their mind's at. We might have to catch up a little bit in terms of the day-to-day operations and execution to actually get to that point that we are delivering the value. So I would encourage you, and a great point, Christy, thanks for reminding us on that there is a self-assessment. Take a look at that. I think, as I said, Sam's put it in the chat, so that should give you a link, and go and see what that does for you, and it's going to position you along this continuum. So with that said, all roads lead to one plan, Christy. You're right.
That's the most important part of this whole thing, right? So the beautiful thing about an advanced planning solution, why it's a separate thing from your ERP environment, is that you are able to do what if scenario simulations, have a baseline, an upside, and a downside plan, and plan all your contingencies, be able to see what it takes to get to financial reconciliation. But at the end of the day, we have to align on one plan. And we can't redo one another's work as we pass from one functional area to the other, because we're just introducing exceptions and gaps into what we just tried to close. So all roads must lead to one plan. And to get proactive and to get action oriented in the sales and operations planning process, we've got to get rid of the passiveness in the room, right? Everybody's got to kind of jump into the pool. You want to have good conversation, constructive conflict, and be able to come out of it with a result that is actually allowing you to act. So that connection of plan, schedule, and actual, reasonable, realistic, and actionable plans that we're going to go forward so that we can get the results that we're looking for becomes so important.
Yeah, absolutely right, 100%. Thank you for that, Christy. So as we get to the questions and just to the wrap up, well, we thought if you take a look at what's on this slide, I'm not going to go bullet point by bullet point, but it's again trying to get that message of the S&OP world versus the S&OE world. These two different places, what's important, what are some of the things that we need to be on top of, and showing that they stay connected. If they stay connected, we will be much stronger. If that connection breaks, we will be so much weaker. And that's really the message. And one of the things I like about this slide is that where that little bubble is for the connection, right alongside it is something that says alerts and exception management, prompt discussions to help keep us on track. And from whether it's exception monitoring in ECC or S4, whether it is the alerts that are in APO, or if it's alerts inside of IBP, those alerts are telling us of any potential disconnect between those two worlds that we were talking about. And I really would encourage you to make copious new use of things like the alerts, the exception messages, etc. We'll notice at the bottom, I mean, we reaffirm that timeline difference. You know, the IBP space is really looking in that 3 to 24 months, whereas the S&OE space is looking to execute right now and get to those value objectives and outcomes that we mentioned earlier on. Any last comments, Christy, that you want on the wrap up that from what I've said on this slide?
I'm so eager for the questions, Sean.
Okay.
I'm gonna hold my feedback and and we'll get questions and then give them one last hurrah at the end.
Let's give it back to Sam. Sam, I know you're going to lead us in the questions that may have been coming through, and yeah, let it go. Let's rip.
Yes, sir. If anyone wants to ask any questions while we're going through them, feel free to put them in the chat, put them in the Q&A section. Either one is fine with us. The first question we have is, in your experience, what is the #1 point of failure for moving to an advanced planning solution like IBP?
Oh, that's a great question. Sean, do you want to start that one?
Well, yeah, let me start. I mean, we have this notion that IBP is kind of a silver bullet. It's the easy button. We just hit it, boom, and everything else is going to be there for us. But I think we need to go back to what we saw right at the beginning when we did the survey. Some of the issues that are out there. This is a journey, and there are a number of challenges that we're going to have to be faced with that are going to impact on how we set up the system, how the data is put in place, what rules we are setting in terms of the master data, how we are effectively transacting against that, etc. And that whole organizational piece that we outlined, the importance of particularly the leadership, really buying into it and helping us as a company to get organizational alignment from top to bottom. But let's go in there with our eyes wide open. It's not a silver bullet to everything. There's some hard graft that has to be done to get it to where it needs to be. But at the end of the day, when it's properly done and we've walked through that maturity process, man, the benefits at the end are just so enormous and wonderful place to get to. So that would be some of the inputs I would have to that question, Christy.
That's great, Sean.
Okay, and on to the next question. We're just trying to unpack all that IBP has to offer and aren't sure where to start. Where would you focus first?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that this is a question for um, most organizations is just where to even begin. We talked a little bit about business maturity continuum, kind of mapping yourself on there in the self-assessment, and that sales and operations planning alongside supply chain control tower and some of the collaboration tools will help you to get your process on track and also get you your feet wet with a lot of the other features and functionality, and then and perhaps building from there. But I would say the other thing to think about is if there is a specific business challenge or there's a uniqueness to kind of where you are in your supply chain journey right now, exploring that and mapping that against the capabilities. I don't know if folks have seen it, but there's a picture that always comes to mind for me, and it has two ladders with two different folks getting ready to climb, and one has really wide steps, and the person is standing at the bottom of it and they're trying to figure out how to take that first step. The other has very narrow steps, and the person is quickly scaling that ladder. And the call out is the importance of small steps. And what I think we would say, Sean, to the folks is to think about it as a roadmap to value, a journey to value, rather than massive leaps. And you may feel like your supply chain or your business situation, in a particular moment in time may require those larger leaps. And that's okay if those are focused and intentional and you've got some support to do it. But where you can, and if you think about the depth and breadth of this process, where you can, try to build to your end goal, but then mature into it with those smaller steps that are iterative, are consumable by people, by the process, and by the organization, so that it's faster and easier for you to get there. You'll actually find that momentum and motion creates the notion of progress. It makes people more invested and then allows you to continue forward more quickly.
Just maybe to your point, Christian, I mean, one of the things we can maybe inform folk of is that there's a lot of information that they can get off the Reveal website. We've got blogs and we've got white papers and we've got all sorts of things out there that talk to this. We'd also encourage you from time to time, we do run what's known as masterclasses. Those masterclasses are very often subject specific. IBP is one of those. So just keep your eyes and ears peeled for that. It certainly is an opportunity to take advantage on, reach out. And Sam will be able, if you reach out to Sam, she'll be able to tell you exactly what's coming down the pipe into the future. And some of those conversations are precisely around this. Well, where do we start? How do we get going? So I would just encourage you to make use of those opportunities as well.
Kelly put a link in chat for everyone that has all of our insights, our white papers, our blogs that John was talking about. You should be able to link to all of those there if you're interested. And then the last question goes well off what you were saying, Sean. It's, I'm interested in hearing more about this. Where can I learn more?
Yeah, I think that was pretty much where I was going to go to. There was to say, we've got white papers, we have blogs, we've got other webinars that are on our website. Kelly's giving you that now. And then, of course, the masterclasses, which we spoke about. Yeah, use those as a potential opportunity. Come along and enjoy the fun. We try and make them full of fun for you. We even have after-hour meetings that we'll have virtual happy hours, if you want to call it. So come and join along within that and see where we're at. But certainly follow the link that Kelly has given you, and that's going to give you some insight into a lot of what's out there.
And we love to talk to you too. So feel free, phone a friend.
Yeah.
This is this topic in particular is an absolute pleasure for us. So and we know that it's challenging and it can be difficult, and sometimes you even need to just commiserate with somebody else who's been through it. So we are absolutely here for you and would love to chat. Hey Sam, before we go, since we have just 4 minutes left before the meeting fully ends, can I make one more comment? For the folks who are joining, or maybe more on the execution side, if we think about the future just on in the ERP environment for what's coming, in S4, actually what really is already here in S4, but if you're still on your journey to get there, what's coming for you in the future. Um, the thing that really changes there is, there's a lot of, everybody's very focused on MRP Live, but the other thing that you get in S4 is that you have the ability to take advantage of those Fiori apps. And those are really intentionally purpose built to follow a cadence of work. And what it does for you as a planner or a buyer is it starts to push information to you. So you're able to see really in a dashboard format where you need to focus. And if you focus on, the work that we were talking about, moving through that business maturity continuum, the other thing that it gives you is it starts to give you some modeling and some what if scenarios right in your ERP environment. So it's going to look at your rules and actually give you options for how you might solve a problem like a shortage situation. So if you're not considering going to an advanced planning solution, I just want to highlight for you on the S&OE side, there's great stuff, things that we probably have always been asking for as, as planners and buyers that we would have always have loved to have, that are now available and have had some good bake time on them and are really usable and can improve the quality of, our day-to-day work and make things much faster for us. So I just wanted to highlight that as well, that on the S&OE side, there's lots of good stuff coming in that space too.
That's a great point. That's a really great point. Yeah. Okay. Well,
Thank you for that, Christy. All right, I'm going to send you guys off today with our next webinar. It has new functional areas, and it is called The Business Guide to S/4HANA versus ECC's Warehouse Integration and Execution on April 3rd. This webinar will highlight how to automate and gain value from these integration points in WM and will touch additional features added to EWM. Today's webinar will be available later today on our website under the Insights tab. You will also be able to find all previously recorded webinars and other educational content like we are talking about, our white papers, our blogs, client success stories, and more. If you go under that Insights tab, if the webinar is not there today, look maybe later. Feel free to shoot me an email, a message, and I will get that to you. I can link you if you're curious and looking for it later. Thank you guys all for joining us. Have a great rest of your day, and we will see you next time.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Sam.
Yeah, thank you, Sam.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Sean.
Christy. Thank you, guys.
Okay, talk soon.
Bye
Bye-bye.
now.